Hi out there, everybody. I presume that we are live. I'm Ron Bass, and I'm delighted to have as our guest today at the Milton Film Festival, filmmaker Paul Saltzman. And you've just seen his remarkable documentary, Meeting the Beatles in India. A little bit of background about Paul. He's had a remarkable career. He's a two-time Emmy Award winner. He's credited with a remarkable 300 films as dramas, documentaries. Paul's done TV series. You know, Paul, I would say that if you're not the most prolific filmmaker in Canada, you're very close to it. Uh, Quite remarkable. So, and I must say, it's Paul and I have known each other for many years, but he was a great help in getting the Milton Film Festival started originally when he showed us his really startling documentary, The Last White Night. So, uh, Paul, I'm not giving too much away by saying he was born in 1923. His father, for those of us who are of a certain age, you may remember Percy Saltzman, who was certainly Canada's iconic weatherman all the time I was growing up, and one of the first in Canada to do it. So Paul's with us tonight. Is, as I say, Meeting the Beatles in India is his latest documentary. One critic called it, he said it's quite a story. And Paul, I think you've done a superb job of weaving firsthand memories with animation, going back to India. And of course, probably the most important thing about it is those iconic Beatles photographs that you took while you were at the Maharishi's ashram in India. Uh, what amazed me watching the documentary is that it took your daughter to remind you that you had these photographs. And I'm thinking to myself, God, here's a guy who's made 300 films, who's obviously used parts of his life to make other documentaries. Had it never occurred to you that this might be the stuff of a documentary? So maybe you could tell us a little bit about the moment your daughter said this to the moment you decided to make a documentary about it.
Sure. Well, the I was going to say strange thing. I don't know that it's strange. Um, when I get back from India in '68, and I wrote one magazine article for Maclean's. I was broke. They wanted the story and the photos, and I wanted to tell people, hey, there's this incredible thing, meditation, which I didn't know about, but had healed a broken heart, as it says in the film, in a half an hour. And meditation, yeah, meditation in '68 was barely on people's lips. Yoga in '68 was barely in the zeitgeist in the Western culture. So I wanted to tell people, hey, there's this incredible thing, meditation. So I wrote the article, and I realized when I finished and they published it on the front cover and all that, I realized that I was talking about the experience too quickly, that I needed to actually let the experience go deeper into my own being. And I remember the moment where I put the 72 slides, of which 54 had anyone famous in them, and I only shot 3 rolls of film. And I remember putting them aside and saying to myself out loud, I don't want to do anything more with these. And little did I know until many years later, when I learned a lot more about psychology, that the thing about the subconscious is it takes things literally. You know, the little engine that could, I think I can, I think I can, I can, I can, that childhood story. So what happened was when I put them away, saying to myself, I don't want to do anything more with these, I literally, honest to God, didn't think about them for 32 years. I didn't tell my first wife, who was from India, that I'd met the Beatles in India, or I had pictures. The way my daughter knew was that apparently when she was around 8, one of our traditions was bedtime stories. And because her mother was Indian, she said to me, tell me about the first time you were in India, Dad. And it was one of many stories. Cut to 8 years later, and she's 16 years old. And she comes into my study one day. She and her 3 best girlfriends had become Beatles fans, having nothing to do with me. You know, the records weren't playing in the house particularly or anything like that. And she walked into my study and she said, "Didn't you tell me when I was little that you met the Beatles in India?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Didn't you tell me you took some pictures of them?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, like, duh, as you see in the film. And the thing is that I showed them to her, and she was the one who instigated that I even remembered them, because they were truly out of sight, out of mind. And she was the one who then said, "Gee, they're really great, Dad. You should do something with them." And that led to doing the first book and later the limited edition books and the gallery shows. But I didn't think about a film until 2005. And then I spent off and on the next 12 years talking to Apple, the Beatles company in London, saying, "Hey, let's do this together," about meditation, about their creativity, about the trip to India, probably the most prolific period in their whole history of songwriting. And after 12 years of them saying maybe later, maybe, yeah, interesting, they said no. And then I started making it. So I started making it really 3 years ago.
Why did they say no, do you think?
I think that's complex. One, they like working with superstars. Like they're superstars, they want to work with superstars. So Peter Jackson and Ron Howard and Martin Scorsese and Paul Saltzman, which doesn't fit in that category. and
You're a superstar to us, Paul. So.
No, it's no problem. And the other thing is they basically said, and they is the management of the company, not Ringo or Paul, although presumably they reflect their opinions. They said, we do projects for two reasons. Quote, we make a shitload of money, close quote, or there's a compelling creative reason. And I said, well, hey, this is a compelling creative reason. How did they write so many songs? And what did meditation have to do with it? And what did the quiet of the ashram and the inner focus have to do with it? That didn't rate on their scale. So that was why, I think.
I was going to ask you about Paul and Ringo, that obviously getting in touch with them was out of the question. Although you think it might, at some point, it could have gone to the two of them to make a decision.
Well, I tried, and in fact, two interesting stories. So I started talking to their company around 2005. Around 2009, Paul and Ringo performed on stage for the first time since the breakup of the Beatles, performed on stage together at the fundraiser at the Radio City Music Hall in New York, put on by David Lynch's Meditation Foundation. They do great work. And it was Eddie Vedder and Diana Krall, I think, and Donovan and Paul and Ringo and other stars raising money. My phone rings here in Oakville around 2008, 2009, and a woman says, "Hello, is this Paul Saltzman?" "Yes." "Is this the Paul Saltzman who was in Rishikesh?" "Yes." "Who's this?" And she introduces herself as the head of video and film and stills archives for Paul McCartney at his company, MPL Productions. And she says to me, "Paul asked me to phone you." I said, "Cool." She said, "We're doing this benefit at the Radio City Music Hall, and Paul's would like to use your slides as the backdrop for the second last song he's going to sing, called Cosmically Conscious. Would that be okay?" And I said, "Yes." And then the conversation was precious. It went like this. I'm going to act it for you. Would that be okay? "Sure." "How much will that cost?" "Nothing. Gratis, free. I wouldn't have these pictures without their generosity." Beat. Silence. 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 "Why does that surprise you? This has never happened before." "What do you mean?" "Well," she says, "when people know it's Paul McCartney, they want a lot of money." I said, "I don't want any money, but on one condition." She said, "What's that?" I said, "That you give me a copy of the videotape of the slideshow you're going to create for my archives." And so that was done. I then tried to talk to Paul about this film. We had a meeting set up in Toronto when he was in at the Canada Centre to do two concerts. And after the first concert, I was supposed to get 15 minutes with him. He was running an hour late. I got bumped. He was sweet. He said, "Here, let's get a picture together." And he turned to his assistant and said, "Book him in for tomorrow." And the next day, that very dear assistant called me 6 times. "We're delayed, we're delayed, we're delayed. Geez, I'm really sorry. CNN has just flown in unexpectedly from New York to interview Paul. We're not going to be able to do it." And I could never get this meeting rescheduled. Now, Ringo twice asked me for some of my pictures, and twice it was like, great, happy to do it. The second time was for the Grammy. He was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame. And it was the same thing. "How much would you like for your pictures?" "Nothing, gratis. I wouldn't have them without their generosity." And they said, "Well, that's very nice of you." And I said, "On one condition." They said, "What's that?" I said, "Give me 2 tickets to the opening party at the Grammy Museum, and I'll come down with my sweetheart." So we did, and that was very cool.
And did you see Ringo?
I saw Ringo, but you know, it was a crush. It was literally a crush to get to him. You literally had to, excuse me, oops, excuse me, oops. So there was no chance of asking him. And who knows, the answer could have been different. But you know, it's a funny thing. I cut the film to Beatles music, and it wasn't, and I kept trying to get them to license me the music. I'll pay for it.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, and I worked, you know, with New York, the company that did the licensing, Sony ATV. Maybe no, we don't think so. No, we don't know. Maybe no. Finally, we were about 6 weeks out from the mix, the final sound mix, and they said, "No, we won't license you the music." So I quickly hired 2 composers, terrific composers, one in the UK and one in Canada. I stripped out all the Beatles music. We composed and for the whole film. And the really blessing here, the blessing, Ron, is the film is better by far without Beatles music. It sounds strange, but their music is so powerful and so overpowering. Every single song is like, boom, blows you away. The film was not as good with the Beatles music in it. It's strange. I was surprised.
Well, I thought you did a remarkable job with the film not having the Beatles music. There were times, I must say, when they talked about, or you talk about in the film about composing a certain piece, that it would have been great to have a few bars. But 2 things I thought you did remarkably well is getting around that. And the animation was a brilliant touch. I mean, what made you decide to do the animation, which I thought worked remarkably well?
Oh, great. Well, it was simple. I wanted to tell those stories, but I didn't have any visuals to go with them.
Exactly.
So
which would stop a lot of people from making the documentary in the first place.
Yeah. And then it was a question of, well, do I do a reenactment? Well, that felt false with other people, as if they were the Beatles. That felt false. I thought about, what about traditional kind of cartoon style? And that felt false. So I landed on graphic novel style illustrations and animating those.
No, it gives it an original sensibility too, that I think you're right. It would not have worked nearly as well with, I hate reenactments in these documentaries anyway. So
yeah, I mean, they work in crime drama scenes type of thing.
A little bit, yes, yeah.
I don't think they work in this kind of thing.
No, so now, why would Apple not grant you the rights to the music? So they show up everywhere else. I mean,
I don't really know. You know, I don't really know. I could have paid them, you know, but it was just a blessing that they didn't in the end. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it works as well. Other than the photographs, what really makes the film work as well is your reminiscences, your ability to remember in detail your week with the Beatles. I come away with, and you've probably been asked this many times, since less than a year later, they were breaking up, September of 1969, I think. did you have any sense at all of tension? That I can't imagine you were sitting there thinking, these guys are going to break up any time now. But there didn't seem to be any tension, any sense that they were at any kind of loggerheads with each other, or was there?
No, they were genuinely very, very close family. That's what they were like. They were like brothers, and there was no signs of tension whatsoever.
And were you must have been taken aback, to say the least, to be reading, as I say, a year or so later, that they were breaking up.
I was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just wonder what could happen in such a short period of time to break up this, and given the creativity that came out of that that time at the ashram as well. It's
yeah. Well, I mean, I don't have firsthand knowledge of that. I have knowledge of what I've read. There were a number of issues. You never brought girlfriends or wives into the recording studio, and John insisted on not only Yoko being there, but being right in the middle under the piano or whatever.
Yes.
I don't think she's the cause of their breakup, but that was breaking a bond by John. There were other pressures, business pressures and all that, and there was a fragmentation around that, a growing mistrust. And I think the bottom line, this is just my take, the bottom line, we were all kids. How old were they when they broke up? They were like in their late 20s, middle to late 20s. And, how much do you know when you're young about conflict resolution, about nonviolent communication? So it just exploded.
Yes, the Rolling Stones must have taken the lessons, and the Beatles didn't. But it's quite amazing that the Rolling Stones are somehow stuck together, and the Beatles couldn't. Listen, we have a couple of things from the audience. Carol Skelly says, thanks, Paul. She's 70 years of age, and she's a Beatle maniac, and she saw them in 1965 at Maple Leaf Gardens, as I must say my wife Kathy did as well. She asked if you've done other documentaries, which of course you've done many other documentaries. She has also started to meditate in 1975. We've done there. Why are they making funny noise?
That was on my end. I think I forgot to turn off my mobile phone.
Oh, I see. So there's another question from, anyway, so Carolyn just had those observations. So thank you, Carolyn. Kathy Tyers wants to know who did the animation. And I'd love to know that as well.
So first of all, the animation was done by an artist in Los Angeles named Mike Vosberg. And if you want to see his work, he has tons of work. If you want to see his work, Mike Vosberg, V-O-S-B, I think U-R-G. The animation of his illustration, so he did the artwork. The animation was done by a guy named Keijo Bosma here in Toronto, and both of them are so talented. The question about the other documentary, I wasn't involved in any other documentary relating to the Beatles in India, and I don't know if the NFB did something or not. I did work at the NFB for a year before I went to India. So I have a credit on a couple of films from the NFB from that period. So she might be referring to that.
Yes, no, I think she just wanted to know in general other documentaries that you have done. And of course you've done, we could probably spend the rest of the night talking about the other work that you've done. So, your documentary, Peter Jackson, the guy who did the Lord of the Rings trilogy, has apparently got 56 hours of unseen Beatles material on film that he's putting together for a documentary later this year. This is more than half a century later, and yet we all seem to be so fascinated still by the Beatles. I'm wondering if you've been putting the documentary together, talking to, going to Liverpool, talking to Beatlemaniacs. Any thoughts of why we remain so fascinated and why the Beatles remain so popular, as I say, more than half a century later?
Sure. I mean, I have my take on it.
Sure,
I think the number one reason is the joy. It's the joy they wrote them with. When I saw them working on Obla D, it was just joy that I watched. They were joyful, and I thought, wow, as I mentioned in the film, it's like joy is a great source of creativity. And I think that's part of it. So when a Beatles song comes on the radio and I'm driving my car, I find myself smiling, not because I met them, because their music is infectious. And I would say that infection is about joy. I also think that, as you know, they went from being a rock band into writing deeply about their own lives. And John Lennon, in his last interview before he was killed, he made a statement, and I think this is an accurate quote. He said, if you want to know about anything about the Beatles, listen to our music. And what I interpreted that as, it wasn't the rock and roll pop music at the beginning. It was, they started writing about their own explorations, their own diving into awareness, consciousness, but also writing about almost current affairs at times. So I think it was a combination of the joy and the depth from which they wrote. And I think that resonates with people to this day.
Yes, and it's I'm always amazed at how this popularity translates from generation to generation in ways that that other iconic performers haven't been able to do. I mean, I think Elvis Presley, for instance, is kept alive by baby boomers. If I say to my kids who are not kids anymore, how about putting some Elvis Presley on? I get a look. But if I say, let's play some Beatles, everybody's in for that. And their and my grandkids are Beatles fans. I doubt very much that they'd be Elvis Presley fans or Chuck Berry fans or
or
Frank Sinatra, who's, I think Sinatra is kept alive as so many other things are by us baby boomers, whereas the Beatles just seem to transcend all of that.
I think so. I mean, you get young Beatles fans all the time. I see that all the time when I do a gallery show or a lecture or a talk. There's young people there too in their 20s.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the most wonderful stories. Now, there were 3 graphic novel sequences that I did that are not in the film because, a film takes on its own life. And as much as they were, I think, excellent stories and excellently rendered, when it came to the final edit, they just kind of didn't fit. I am hoping to do a DVD Blu-ray release, and one of the things I'd love to do is to put those 3 in there that have never been seen. The reason I'm saying this is about what you're saying about young people. The best story I've ever heard, for me, for my preference, the best story I've ever heard of the impact of the Beatles. I'm at a Beatles convention. I'm giving a talk with slides to about 500 people. And I have a room with my photographs that people can buy and books and so on. And a young woman comes up to me in my room where the photos are. And she asks me about what they were like and the kind of normal questions and all that stuff. And I said to her, so tell me about your affection for the Beatles. She said, well, I was in grade 9 in Kentucky. And the grade 9 homeroom teacher was very stern. We were all afraid of him. He never smiled. He came in and did the homeroom attendance and never a smile. One day, one of the boys in the grade 9 class smuggles in ahead of the class a small wind-up 45 recorder playback record player and hides it under his desk at the back of the room. And the teacher starts to take, not smiling, comes in stern. People are afraid of him. He comes in, he starts to take attendance. The boy reaches down and turns on "She Loves You." And all of a sudden, "She Loves You" starts blaring from the back of the room. And she said that everybody froze and the teacher froze. And then after a moment, the teacher's mouth went and he started smiling. They all jumped up and danced to the whole song in the aisles. She said the homeroom was never the same again. The teacher always smiled and no one was afraid of him. Well, whoa, the power of Beatles music.
Oh, exactly. Well, it's funny you talked briefly in the film about your dad and an abusive relationship, and I had much the same relationship with my father, and it was not a happy childhood. But the one time I remember vividly, all of us coming together in the family was the night that the Beatles appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show, and it was 64, 65. And my parents knew nothing about the Beatles, had no interest in pop music, and certainly not my bank manager father. But that night, we all gathered around the television set. We all kind of bonded over these four guys singing songs that caught everybody in the room, that caught everybody's imagination. And I remember that vividly. And I thought to myself at the time, God, if my father likes the Beatles, what's going to happen to these guys? And that's the thing. Even at the time, everyone liked the Beatles. Sure. But it's amazing how they brought us all together. I don't know. Was your dad a Beatles fan?
No, he wasn't, and neither was my mom. They just weren't exposed to it, from what I could tell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No. Well, I think the only time my parents were exposed to, other than the fact that we went out and bought the first Beatles album and that sort of thing. But
sure.
But certainly that was the. Now, were you a buyer of the albums as a kid?
Oh yeah. We used to dance to their music in the early days of the rock and roll kind of dance music that they did. She Loves You, I Want to Hold Your Hand, Please Mr. Postman, all that. We danced to their music at our parties as a young group of people. And I went and started buying out their records for sure, and have most of their records from those days. And I even have 2 or 3 copies of some, not as a collector. Apparently I bought 2 or 3 copies at some point.
Jennifer, the august director and founder of the festival, has a question. Curious if you've seen Danny Boyle's film Yesterday and what you thought of it.
I did see Yesterday. I was excited to see it. First of all, I'm a huge fan of Danny Boyle. He's brilliant.
Yes, me too.
And I thought the film, first of all, was beautifully made, wonderful fun. I thought the guy that they got to play the lead was staggeringly excellent. So I enjoyed it very much. I had one issue with it, and that was there was some basic storytelling glitches. It was like, wait a minute, how does that make sense? What about,
Oh.
And the
yes,
trouble
I thought that further it went into the film, the less it worked, but
yeah, they ran into some logic problems for how the concept, absolutely sensationally brilliant. What a great concept.
Yes.
But they needed to fix a couple of inner connections that would have not made you and me both think, wait a minute, what just happened here? Or how can they not know, but they know, type thing.
Exactly. Yes. For those who haven't seen Yesterday, it's about a guy who wakes up one morning. He's a musician. He hasn't been able to have any success at all, but he knows all the Beatles tunes. And he wakes up one morning and realizes that he's now in a world where there are no Beatles. So he becomes a huge success singing Beatles songs. And what it sort of falls apart towards the end, but it's quite charming in places. And you're right, the actor who plays the musician is very good at it.
Oh yeah, it's a brilliant film and joyful, and the way they do the music is fantastic. And what was difficult for me is a small glitch in story structure.
Now we have Carolyn, well, this is Carolyn Skelly again. I went to a Beatles convention in Liverpool a few years ago, and they asked us to raise our hand if we saw them. I was one of the very few people who raised their hand. The place was packed, interestingly enough.
Very interesting. Well, good that you saw them, Carolyn.
Yes, congratulations, as I say. Well, you know, they didn't tour that much, did they? After they became a success, and you know, they talked a lot. You know, and of course the sound equipment in those days was so rudimentary that you know, Kathy talked about going to Maple Leaf Gardens. She never heard a thing. She just saw four guys playing instruments a long way on the stage with everybody screaming. Well, you know, so. Um, uh, the fact that they'd seen them in person is terrific. So, um, so again, from Kathy, again, these are sort of reminiscences from people, which are very welcome, because the film inspires that, and the talk of the Beatles inspires that. So I remember my daughter at 16 telling me I had to listen to this new song that she just heard on the radio, and it was "Love, Love Me Do."
Great.
So, I doubt very much how many kids are getting their parents to listen to Heartbreak Hotel. So it's fascinating. So Paul, meeting the Beatles obviously inspired a lifelong fascination with them on the one hand. On the other hand, and probably more important to your life, it inspired a lifelong obsession, fascination with the subcontinent of India. And you've been back 60 times, I understand. You now take tours to India. Tell us a little bit, if you can, about what it is about the country that keeps you coming back, and a little bit about the tours that you take.
Sure. Well, first of all, for whatever reason, the first time I ever landed in India, within days, I felt my body transform. I felt I was breathing deeper. I felt my shoulders open up. I felt I was home. I don't know why. I just did. And to me, India is one of the most creative countries in the world. The arts, the crafts, the dance, the song, the creativity is everywhere and visible. It's probably the most colorful country I've ever been in. You know, colorful saris, colorful festivals, colorful everything. Also, to me, and again, you know, India's got all the problems you read about, but we lose perspective. You know, when I came back from India the first time, people said, "How could you stand the poverty?" Well, I didn't see much, partly because
yeah,
you know, it's like, and the other thing is, I did a little bit of research and I found out that 30% of Indians in 68 lived below the poverty line. And I did a little bit of research and I found, oh, isn't that interesting? 28% of Canadians live below the poverty line. Poverty's terrible, it's crushing, but you know, let's look at ourselves as well. We all need to heal. We all need to do something more about poverty and inequity. But India also, in general, again, generalization, in general, Indian people are more friendly than Western or European people. I just find a different feeling, a quieterness, a more openness, really a very hospitable sense. I mean, the first time I was in India, if I stood on a street corner for 40, 30 seconds, looking around, deciding where I wanted to go, I'd have 2 or 3 people come up and say, "Are you lost? Can we help you?" You know, it's a different culture.
right.
Partly it's 5 or 10,000 years old, as opposed to our culture, which is much younger. So India, to me, is a joyful experience. And the reason I take small tour groups there, I've done it 4 times, and the 5th one will be in 2022. We were supposed to go recently in September of this past year, but obviously because of COVID. And then we thought to ourselves, well, we can't trust that COVID will be under control in 1 year. So we'll put it off for 2 years. So we're set to go in September of 2022. But it's really to share my joy and love of India, but also to expose people to that joy and that love. And one more little thing. The way the first tour came about was because of my work, the Beatles' work in India. I've had many people, 50 to 100, that's a lot.
Yes.
50 to 100 people in various cities at various times say to me exactly the same question. I've always wanted to go to India, but it scares me.
Yeah.
And I would say, why does it scare you? And they'd say, the dirt, the food, the heat, the crowded. And I would just share my experiences. No, I was never trying to convince people. It's not how I live. So I would share my experiences. Most people who asked this were, 30s, 40s, 50s. But one day, a guy who had to be in early 20s asked the same question or said, I've always wanted to go to it. It scares me. I said, why does it scare you? We talked. And at the end of which he said to me, and no one had ever done this before, he said, would you ever take anybody? And I said, what a nice idea. So it took me 2 years to find a travel agency. It happens to be in Vancouver, who I like and trust, because I know how to organize stuff as a filmmaker, but I didn't want to organize the tours. I wanted to lead them and have the joy of sharing. So it took 2 years. I found a travel agency in Vancouver, and we've done 4 trips now. And every one of them, people finish the trip and they say, wow, thank you, wonderful. They have a great time. And we see a lot. We start way in South India and Southern Kerala, and we make our way all the way up to Rishikesh. And we spend the last 3 days just chilling out and going to the Beatles ashram and whitewater rafting on the Ganges, which didn't exist in '68.
I can imagine. Have you seen The White Tiger on Netflix, which is a very critical film, a terrific film, but very critical of life and poverty in India, and based on a Booker Award-winning novel. So I just wonder if you read the novel or seen the movie.
I don't know about it, no.
If you're a Netflix subscriber, I'd love to hear what you think of it. It's cool. Beautifully done, but very critical, and as is the novel by an Indian novelist. So, but yes, if Paul, I tell you, I think I share the hesitation of that you've just talked about. If I go to India, and Kathy and I go to India, we're going with you. I just want you to know that.
That would be a hoot, Ron.
It would be, because I think your love of the country would be hard to overcome. So it would be great to share the experience with you. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk to you about is a great moment in the movie when your daughter gives you that look that all daughters give their fathers at some point, that skeptical look that demonstrates that the kids are not going to be like you. And she's obviously a little more skeptical about transcendental meditation than are you. Do you still meditate? Are you still as enthusiastic as ever about it?
I'm not. First of all, it changed my life. But then being young and a bit careless, I meditated for a month or two. Then I tapered off, and I meditated when I was in a crisis or I was in stress. I still meditate, but I use 2 different methods. So TM is one of them. And of course, with that scene with my daughter, with Devyani, she's not just skeptical of TM, she's skeptical of, as she said, one-stop shopping for a spiritual is scary, Dad. I love the scenes with her in the film. She's just marvelous, authentic.
Oh, she's great. She's great. She's got the right attitude towards her father.
I agree completely.
As most daughters do. I have the same thing with my daughters.
Yeah. So I still meditate, but not religiously, not regularly, when I feel like it, when I need it.
When you came back from India, you were so heartbroken when your girlfriend at the time broke up. And of course, there's nothing like heartbreak when you're in your 20s. Did you feel better? Or did you get back home and it was, oh God, it's like I was never away? And
no, well, definitely the meditation, as I said in the movie, the meditation changed the heartbreak into a state of bliss. I still longed to get back together with her. That took about 2 years to get over. Neither of us, we were both hurt. She was hurt. I left. I was hurt. She had moved in with Henry. She wasn't living with Henry by the time I got back. We didn't know how, we passed in the night. We didn't know how to sit down without the hurt being in the way. So we never really sat down and talked about it. But then you move on, and finally, it took a couple of years for me stopping to hope we got back together. But I wasn't in the agony. The agony was solved within that first 30-minute meditation.
You're right. So it did help, obviously.
Hugely. Yeah. It was life-changing.
I wish I'd known you back then. You could have been an immense help to me, Paul, but I'm glad we know each other now. The last question that they're asking us to wrap up here. I wanted to ask you about, part of what you were doing back then, and again, you were in your 20s, but you kind of searching for yourself. And we're both in our 70s now. Does that search continue for you? Are you still looking for something that you find in meditation, or do you find yourself, look, I'm a certain age. I know who I am. I know what I want. Life is settled.
Well, I think the real answer is both. First of all, I think life is an endless exploration. And if we're open to it, there are discoveries to be made every day and every second day and so on. So yes, I know who I am in a very deep way, but I'm also still exploring who is that and what is it that I need and what is it that I want. And I'm not talking about that in a self-centered way. I'm talking about that in a sense of wellness. As we evolve, we have different needs, we have different wants, and how to hear those within ourselves and how to honor those with love for ourselves and others. So to me, it's a process that never ends. But the truth is, for me, life just gets better and better because, and it's the old story, a conscious life is a life worth living. An unconscious life, less so.
Well, listen, thank you so much for being here tonight. It's a fascinating documentary. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
You too.
We will hopefully do it again. And I look forward to the day when we can both go back to India. So thank you, Paul, and everybody who had questions. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you for sharing your memories of the Beatles. Now I'm getting, please stay on a bit when we, okay, so they're going to turn off the live, but we have to stay on for a few minutes more. But anyway, for everybody else, thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Jennifer.